Joining us now, two-time Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist and the news executive editor for the New Yorker website, David Rohde. He's out now with the new book entitled In Deep, the FBI, the CIA, and the Truth about America's deep state.
David, thank you so much for being with us. Talk about what has been unleashed over the past 3.5 years, which, of course, has been out there. I mean, you could go all the way back to Timothy McVeigh. And go back to a lot of the so-called militia movements. Been around for a long time, but what's been unleashed, especially over the past 3.5 years?
Well, you're right. This has been around for a long time. And to be fair, I started this book because there was a poll that came out in 2018, and it showed that 70% of Americans believed that there was a secret group of government officials and military officials that were manipulating policy in Washington. And it sort of struck me at how, widespread this has become. And there is, a long history of abuse by the FBI and the CIA, but it has been exacerbated in this era. Some of it's the president, as you've said. So I wrote this book about how do we kind of control the FBI and the CIA. They've abused groups on the right and the left in the past. And also, how do we control presidents? How powerful should a president be?
Jonathan Lemire is with us and has a question. Jonathan.
So, David, the president's distrust of the so-called deep state is well documented. He has complained about it and blamed it for the Russian investigation, the Ukraine impeachment matter, and a number of other attempts to, he believes, undermine him. Talk to us, if you will, about how that distrust may have played a role in the government's response to this pandemic. Were there positions not filled that should have been, information that he was presented to him that he did not believe? Talk to us about how that may have played out and how, frankly, it may have cost some Americans their lives.
President Trump, throughout his career has sort of been disdainful and suspicious of expert opinion. And this played out, I think, in the coronavirus. There's been great reporting by the New York Times and the Washington Post about him's kind of, downplaying warnings he was getting from medical experts. The most famous one would be, Dr. Anthony Fauci. There was this famous incident where Trump in a press conference referred to the State Department as the deep State Department. Fauci appeared skeptical in the background, and then he was immediately sort of attacked online. I looked, there were references to him as shortstop and Fraudici, Corona coup, and then in the, some of the protests over the last few days, there's been a fire Fauci chant. So I don't know exactly, I can't prove the number of, cases or infections or how this happened. But there's a dangerous dynamic of the president being very skeptical of the government officials around him. It may have very likely slowed his response to coronavirus. And this is the price of kind of conspiracy theories and this kind of brutal winner-take-all politics we're engaged in at this point in American history.
And it's so interesting, Katie Kay, that we've heard about the fire Fauci tweets, the president retweets it. You would think that this was really catching on, and then you see a poll that 60% of Americans trust what Dr. Fauci say, only 8% do not. This is, again, a small percentage, but sadly, it is a small percentage of people that are off the mainstream political grid that this president actually listens to.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like the vast majority of people in Fairfax County, Virginia, or in the suburbs of Detroit and Milwaukee are actually listening to the authorities and to the civil servants. But, David, do you think that going forwards, it's a kind of, is there almost a broader skepticism of government generally and government departments that's going to make it hard for us to come out of this? If you look at the countries that have handled this successfully, you look at Germany, you look at Iceland, you look at South Korea, there doesn't seem to be that same skepticism of government and of officials and expertise that the president seems to have. And I just wonder how we get out of this if the CDC isn't fully empowered, the FDA isn't fully empowered, the NIH isn't fully empowered. If those branches aren't fully empowered and believed in by the White House and by the executive, is it going to make it harder for us to get out of this?
It is going to make it harder. And this is a broad problem. Look, there's people on the left who fear kind of the government as well. They use the term the military-industrial complex. They fear sort of generals and defense contractors putting us into endless wars. On the right, there's conservatives, and this will continue after Donald Trump's no longer in office. They fear an administrative state, that there's this ever-growing government that's taking away our rights. But I think President Trump, he uses the term deep state as a political tool. It immediately is a way to discredit his critics by pointing them that way. It's creating and exacerbating our fear of government. And it's a very clear political tactic. He used this from the moment he entered politics. He, uses a conspiracy theory to discredit his rival, was Barack Obama, born in the United States. And then at the same time, he hides information about himself. And that's what concerns me most, is that there's a growing lack of transparency by the Trump administration. We don't know what's happening in the White House, and that's fueling public distrust. And facts matter, basic facts. What do we do? Coronavirus shows how important that is.
All right, the new book is In Deep, the FBI, the CIA, and the Truth About America's Deep State. David Rohde, thank you very much for coming on this morning. And
thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.